Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I'm going to be talking about what I read while I was on vacation. A few weeks ago, my husband had a conference in Jamaica and I was like, well, you're going to go there for work. I am going to go there to sit on a beach all day and just read, which is exactly what I did. I have the sunburns on my feet to prove it. I had planned to read a lot, but I was also a little unsure if I was going to read that much, just because this year, if you've watched my channel, like I've had like kind of a weird year medically, and so it's just been kind of stressful. And reading wise, the trade-off has been just that most of the reading I've been doing has been for the BookTube Prize or nonfiction book club, so it's been pretty structured, pretty nonfiction heavy, and also, tends to be more on the heavy side. So even though I am a big romance reader, the past few months I just haven't really gotten that much, romance reading in. I've also this year been wanting to branch out into other genres of fiction, and unfortunately that hasn't happened that much either. So I was kind of hoping with this vacation to be able to get some of that more nonfiction, which is just fiction, reading in. So I didn't necessarily read a lot, but I did read in that vein, and so I'm really excited about it. I did have one nonfiction book, which I'll talk about later, but yeah, I'm just happy overall that I went on vacation, got to kind of get out of the house a little bit, kind of get out of my own wallowy kind of mindset, and just, yeah, enjoy myself by the beach. But because this is my video and I can do whatever I want, I do also want to talk about two books that I read right before I went on vacation that I think kind of helped me, I don't know, warm up. They kind of helped me get back into romance reading and get back into just enjoying something more light, even if they are at times also kind of heavy. So the first book is The Long Game by Rachel Reed, which is the latest book in her Game Changer series, which is a romance series centered around gay hockey players. The Long Game is the sequel to actually the second book in the series, which is Heated Rivalry, which is about two rivals, Shane and Ilya. They've basically, in Heated Rivalry, they are, as you can tell from the title, they are rivals. They are on two rival teams. They've both been super hyped up as these like amazing rookies in the same kind of age group. So really there's been this whole media thing centered around them, but in the background they have been secretly hooking up, and over the course of a lot of years that take place in that book, you see them go through different progressions of first realizing they're attracted to each other, and then over years realizing that they are actually in love with each other. The end of Heated Rivalry is technically a happily for now, and that was something that I sort of had mixed feelings about at the time, but The Long Game happened. So this is several books later in the series, and The Long Game is now taking place after like a few years after that end of Heated Rivalry, and it basically follows Shane and Ilya from there to see how they get to their version of Happily Ever After. I'm pretty sure that Heated Rivalry has to be the most popular book from the Game Changer series, which I think is for a lot of reasons. I think it has a unique structure to it. I think also the core, that enemies to lovers kind of situation, is just really, really well done. And I think also the characters, in particular Ilya, is at this point basically the heart of the entire series. He's clearly the one that I think Reed has invested a lot in terms of her portrayal of him and how he kind of shows up in everybody else's books as well. And it's a lot of fun, and I think it's well done. And so I think that book has ended up feeling like the beating heart of the entire series, and their relationship has felt like this thing that is just, I don't know, at the core of everything in the background. So I have been waiting for The Long Game for a while because I have been wanting to see how the story goes, and I think part of what was so exciting for me, again, like I've been in this funk where I just haven't read a lot of romance, and so it was just really nice to know like this book that I am so excited for is coming out, and then it did, and I was like mildly anxious, like I've been in this non-romance mood, am I gonna enjoy it? But then I sat down, immediately fell in love again, and I was just so happy to see them kind of deal with the actual impact of what the end of Heated Rivalry is. I think the thing I've loved about Game Changers overall, like yes, Heated Rivalry is definitely, in my opinion, the best book in the series, but the thing I have loved about Reed's writing in each of these books is that I think she's very, very thoughtful about what each book means for the characters involved. And so one of the things that I sometimes get frustrated with romance writers is when you start to read their books and you realize that they basically have like maybe 3 to 4 plot lines that they're reusing over and over again. And the other thing where like you realize like if you've gotten a certain percentage along in the book, you like start to know what to expect in terms of like, okay, this is when they're gonna kiss, this is when they're gonna bone, this is when they're gonna have some kind of fallout. And that's not true for all romance writers, but it's definitely something I've noticed the more I get invested in particular writers. And, you know, Reed has only written this one series so far, so I don't know if that's something that I'll notice in the future. But for now, the thing that I've really appreciated about her books is that they feel so specifically written for the couples that are at the center of them. And it's especially important because I think mental health is a really clear thing that she's thinking about with these players and also with their partners, and how, you know, various aspects of hockey culture in particular are shaping their interactions and their own perceptions of themselves. And I think that's especially important for the long game because it is following heated rivalry, which, like I said, has this happily for now like ending to it where I don't want to spoil it too much, but like basically the characters are together, but their relationship is still a secret. And so the long game is following that and really dealing with the fact that like, yeah, that was like a happily for now in the moment when you're reading that book, but for the characters, that's really not that happy of an ending because that's really hard. Like they are very much in love with each other and there are all of these things that they can't do because they can't tell people or they can't even have like a hint of their relationship come out. And so I think the book does a really good job of grappling with the fact that the premise of it is not actually that happy, that these characters are really in a tough moment in their lives of trying to figure out how do we do this relationship? Like, how do we be together, both in terms of the long distance of it all and also the secretness of it all? So I really appreciated what felt like kind of an honest, I guess, grasp of what the ending of Heated Rivalry actually meant for the characters and what it would look like for them to go from there. There were some plot choices that I wasn't super in love with, but I think, I don't know, I'm doing a reread now with the audiobook. Like I read the ebook when I immediately got it because like obviously I was like, okay, you know, it's here, I've been waiting for it, I'm gonna dive in. And you know, the first time through, like you're kind of just going through it quickly. And now I'm listening to the audiobook so I can enjoy it at a slightly slower pace. And so I'm curious how those things are gonna hit me this time around. But overall, despite, you know, there being some choices that I wasn't super in love with, I love the book overall. I think it is really, really well done. And like I said, I think it is done with a lot of thought and care for who these characters are. So it doesn't just feel like Heated Rivalry Part 2, the fan service edition, because so many people loved it. It feels like it's actually like growing that story more. If you are interested in this book, but you haven't read Heated Rivalry yet, you definitely need to read that one first. I would also recommend checking out the rest of Game Changers. I know people don't love the other books nearly as much as Heated Rivalry, but I do think it's worth checking out, again, just because of how well Reed approaches each book specifically. So even though there are some books that I don't like as much as the others, I still think they're worth reading and worth checking out. And then also, again, like if for the sheer Ilya-ness of it all, it's worth it to just see how he pops up in them. And especially the book that came out before The Long Game, Role Model, he has a major role in that book, so I think it's worth reading it for that. The second book for my pre-vacation days that got me back into enjoying some romance was Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. So this book is about Delilah Green, from the title. She used to live in this town called Bright Falls. It's a small town, and she grew up, left to become a photographer in New York City, but she now has to go back because her stepsister, Astrid, who she does not have a great relationship with, Astrid is getting married and Delilah Green is going to be photographing it. So while she's there, she reconnects with Astrid's friends, who also she was not really necessarily great friends with because, you know, they were good friends with Astrid. Astrid and Delilah didn't get along, so there's just been a lot of tension there. But in particular, Delilah connects with Astrid's friend, Claire Sutherland, who is a single mom. And Delilah and Claire, you know, they definitely kind of hit it off, but also are a little aware that maybe this isn't a great idea. But also they bond over the fact that Astrid's fiance, that, you know, she's supposed to be getting married to, is an absolute dick. And so they kind of are like trying to figure out how they can make this wedding not happen. I think the thing that I loved most about this book is how well it does the conflict between all of the characters. So, you know, from that premise, you can tell there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of conflict. There's, you know, Delilah and Astrid have never gotten along. There's Delilah and Astrid's friends have never gotten along. And the thing that I thought this book really, really did a good job of, and this is similar to kind of what I was talking about with Reed's writing, where I feel like there's a lot of thought and care put into understanding the characters. The thing that I loved about Delilah Green Doesn't Care is the fact that all of these characters are in these conflicts where they're both right and they're both wrong. Like, I think that's like one of the things that I'm coming to appreciate about certain romance novels and certain romance writers is when they can write these kinds of arguments, these conflicts between the two main characters, where you see both sides and you see both where these people are right and where they are not right, and where they're really kind of coming to not understand each other, or they're like maybe taking something personally in a way that's maybe not meant to be personal, or they're just acting messy in a way that still is grounded in something real. And when I say that, what I'm thinking about in contrast to that are a lot of romance novels where I feel like the conflicts are very one-sided. Like, you read it and you know that like one person is clearly right in this argument and one person is clearly wrong, and the person who is wrong has to basically apologize, acknowledge that they were wrong, change their behavior, and that's a thing. And obviously that is a real thing that happens. So like, I'm not knocking the fact that like, you know, conflicts like can be one-sided, because, you know, we've all had them. Obviously, any conflict that I have had with somebody else is that person's fault and not mine. But yeah, I mean, I think that my problem with that is a lot of times it feels like conflict for conflict's sake, or to just make some kind of point very bluntly, but like without really, I don't know, engaging with why there would be tension around that point to begin with. I'm also a Real Housewives fan, and like Real Housewives arguments are the epitome of arguments where everyone is wrong. And what I loved about Delilah Green is those arguments are not quite at Real Housewives level, because like the thing is, it's like everyone's wrong, but also, like I said, like everyone's also a little bit right too. Like, there are reasons why everyone is acting messy in this book. There are reasons why they are making the mistakes with each other that they are. And I just thought the book did a really good job of engaging with that and really kind of just like savoring it, like really kind of going to where those arguments would naturally go to. I think there are times where you could read this book and maybe be frustrated with the characters, because some of these conflicts are things that are rooted in, you know, people not talking to each other. They're rooted in things that are like kind of petty, but also like these are conflicts that are going all the way back to when these women were children. So the fact that they are petty and rooted in a lack of communication is actually, I think, kind of realistic, and also is done in a way where it shows the, I don't know, what those conflicts as kids has done to them as adults and what it takes for them to move past it. So again, I think it's something where maybe some people would read this book and get frustrated with these characters, but I loved it because I felt like the book just did it in such a really well thought out way. And also, I just thought the romance between Delilah and Claire was really, really sweet and really well done. Claire is the single mother, and she's dealing with this ex who is not necessarily had the best track record, and she's trying to figure out like how to trust and how to trust him, but also now that Delilah is in town, like how to trust this woman who she's really attracted to, but who she knows is also someone who is, you know, she's left their town before and she doesn't really know what to do with that. And then on the other end, we have Delilah, who like is really, really sure of herself in a lot of ways, but is now also having to figure out the ways that her resentments have shaped her life, both for good and for bad. And she has to think about where she wants this person that she's now attracted to. She's like really into Claire. She's like, well, where does that fit in with all of this? And how does this fit in with my understanding of myself and my family? And I just really loved how these two characters work together to get to their romantic happily ever after. And yeah, I just thought it was really sweet. And so I'm really excited for the rest of this series now. The next book is about Astrid, who is Delilah's stepsister. She was a very fascinating character in this book who I think we've only started to understand. So I'm really excited for the next book. So now we are moving on to the books that I read on vacation, and there were 3 books total, 2 of which I enjoyed, but like don't necessarily have a lot to say because for reasons we'll get into. And then the third book, which I did not enjoy, but as it goes, that means that I actually have a lot to say about it. So the first book I want to talk about is Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is a nonfiction book about Northern Ireland and the Troubles, and specifically it uses the murder of Jean McConville in 1972 as a way to look at the paranoia, the violence, and trauma that took place both in those immediate moments, but also in the decades around the Troubles. So I actually started reading this book a few years ago, and it was around when I think it probably had come out and everyone was talking about it. And I was listening to it on audiobook, and the audiobook narrator is great, but the book itself is so it covers a lot. It covers a lot of different people. It talks about a lot of different aspects of the Troubles in terms of different movements and stuff that were going on. So I had a really hard time with audiobook keeping track of all of the information that I needed to understand what was going on whatever next page I was reading. So I put it on hold and decided to just buy a physical copy of the book to return to later. I'm glad because the book also includes pictures, which is I don't know, it's useful sometimes too for helping me kind of remember specific details and keep track of different people and whatnot. So I'm glad that I bought the physical book, but I was still not getting around to reading it, so I decided to bring it with me on vacation. It's not necessarily what you would think of as a beach read, but the writing itself is very engrossing and moves very quickly, so even though there is a lot of information to get through, I found it a very good, engrossing read. When I talk about the fact that I don't know that I necessarily have a lot to say about it, that's really rooted in the fact that when it comes to nonfiction, I sometimes feel uncomfortable reviewing certain types of books. And especially in this case, this book to me, belongs in the general category of books that are about controversial, divisive topics that I do not necessarily know much about. And so it's important to me to read Say Nothing so that I start to understand more about the Troubles because, going into this, my knowledge of the Troubles is mostly coming from, from pop culture, stuff like Dairy Girls and maybe a little bit of the news when I was a kid, but otherwise I don't really know that much more about it. So I do want to read more nonfiction about the Troubles to understand it better, but I also, as a result, don't really have a good capacity to kind of process a lot of it. I don't have a good understanding of the different narratives that are built up around the Troubles. The point of all that is that I really enjoyed Say Nothing, and I don't know too much more about how to talk about the specific, historical narrative that it's telling, but I really, really appreciated it for the way that it told the narrative that it did. I think it did a really good job of using the murder of Jean McConville as a way to kind of ground the narrative in something that is really horrifying and also something that is still known but not known, a lot of the things that are going on around it, and to use that as a way to illustrate so many different aspects of the Troubles, from the way that, again, it was violent to the ways that it was traumatic, especially for McConville's children, who were basically left as orphans after this and then had to deal with a lot after that, and to deal with the fact that the murder of their mother and, the people who did it, who we probably know who did it, but also will probably never acknowledge their responsibility for various reasons. They are that is a significant thing for them to have to go through. And I also appreciated the way that Keefe weaves in a lot of different personal narratives to tell a bigger story about the IRA, which has been a thing that I have been wanting to understand. Like I said, I feel like these are all words that I have heard and just have never really been able to parse through I don't know, just what the lay of the land is, I guess, historically and also in the current moment. And I'm not going to pretend that I now know a lot. I think I've basically taken a very small half step up in my understanding, but I do really appreciate it. I remember reading this book and then basically a day or two after I finished it, there was stuff in the news about Sinn Féin and the recent elections in Northern Ireland. And I was like, okay, I feel like I'm starting to understand a little bit better, what what the people on the news are talking about, what a lot of this means, who these people are. I really appreciated this book for giving me that kind of very basic level understanding that I am now at, I think, with the Troubles. The next book that I want to talk about that I read while I was on vacation is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is a sci-fi novel. It is the first book in a trilogy, the Southern Reach trilogy. It was also adapted into a movie. I have not yet yet watched the movie, which is actually kind of unusual. Well, not unusual. A thing I've realized about myself is I actually kind of prefer watching adaptations before I read the book, because I don't like going into adaptations with that mindset of like judging everything against the book. I think it's actually more fun to just enjoy adaptations for what they are, which is just like a way to enjoy that story in a completely new, different way. But at the same time, I am not immune from that impulse of being like, but in the book there was this. But also, I think that the movie is supposed to be a little bit creepy and scary, and I am not sure if that is really up my alley. So I have just been wanting to read this book for a while, and in particular because I read the book Islands of Abandonment last year, which is a nonfiction book by Cal Flynn, which is about abandoned spaces around the world. So very much in line with what Annihilation is about, which is about this expedition of, I think it's 4 scientists. It's a biologist, a surveyor, a linguist, and an anthropologist. They go to this area called Area X, which has been abandoned, and it has lots of unsettling things going on. The nature of their expedition is very mysterious and unknown. You can see the connection there. We've got all of these abandoned spaces, both the real ones in Islands of Abandonment and the imagined ones of Annihilation. And Islands of Abandonment was one of my favorite books from last year, in part because a lot of it is just about ecology. And I grew up not appreciating how fucking cool ecology is, because I just like would look out at nature and I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. It's great, whatever. But like, it's not for me. Now, like, there are so many weird little stories about ecology gone wrong, and they're so cool, and it's kind of overwhelming when you think about it. And that was the feeling that I had reading Islands of Abandonment. It's just like how fucking cool and weird and mysterious all of these spaces are. And like, we can only think of them in like really tiny little pieces at a time. Like, it's really hard for any person, I think, to grasp the entirety of ecology because it's just so vast and mysterious. That was the thing that I had felt while reading Islands of Abandonment, and that was a feeling that I got from reading Annihilation as well. The thing that I loved about this book, like the word that kept coming to mind while I was reading it, is indulgent. Because this book was just so indulgent with how much it leaned into its fascination with ecology and its fascination with creating this new imagined ecology that we're still not going to fully know all of the details about, because that is sort of at the core, I think, of what happens in ecosystems. There are just all these tiny pieces that come together and that interact in ways that you are not necessarily going to be able to predict. You're not going to be able to tell. And also, if you remove a link, like in the case of Islands of Abandonment, the link that's removed in all of these cases are people. And the way that those ecosystems respond are varied and weird, and you don't necessarily know what to expect. And reading Annihilation reminded me a lot of that feeling of reading Islands of Abandonment and thinking through like, like what happens when you take that link out, or what happens when you add that link back in? And I just really enjoyed that. I did say that I don't know that I necessarily have a lot to say about the book, and a lot of that is because I feel like such a newbie when it comes to sci-fi, and I just don't necessarily have a good foundation for like thinking through my thoughts about Annihilation in the broader context of what science fiction does and how it uses science in that fictional way to explore the world, and in this case to also build out the interior life of the scientist whose point of view we're really focused on. So that's something that I feel like is going to take me more time, and one of my goals this year is to read more sci-fi, so I will probably return to this trilogy and finish it at some point just to see how they build on each other and to see if I start kind of understanding a little bit more about like how this all works. But yeah, I'm really glad that I read it. I really love Vandermeer's descriptions of things. I really love the way that he really brought to the book like this clear love of ecology and how these ecosystems work, and just imagining how diverse and weird they can become. Okay, the last book. I sometimes make these wrap-up videos, and really I make the wrap-up videos all just to talk about one book. And I mostly made this video to talk about The Long Game, but I also mostly made it to talk about The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. And while I loved The Long Game, and part of why I wanted to talk about it is just to be like, hey, I read this book that I've been really excited about for like a few years now, and I'm so happy. Unfortunately, The Love Hypothesis is not really the same sense of joy for me. But before we get into the feelings, just to quickly summarize for those of you who have not heard about it, don't know what it's about, which I don't know how because this book has been everywhere. But The Love Hypothesis is about Olive. She is a biology PhD student at Stanford, and she gets caught up in a truly stupid fake dating scheme with Adam, a professor in her department who is supposedly an asshole, but maybe might not be an asshole. I'm sorry, I'm calling their fake dating plan stupid, but the truth is all fake dating plans are stupid. And as a trope, part of the fun is watching people make this stupid plan and then realize stupidly that they're in love with each other. So I don't mean to like be like, oh, these two people are not allowed to be stupid, but I just, okay. Here's the thing. Let's just get into it. The problem that I knew going into this book is that I was bringing too much baggage to it. I didn't do my PhD in biology, I did my PhD in biomedical engineering. And even though, they're not exactly the same field and, biologists are, in my opinion, a little bit too hung up on their PCR protocols being perfect, overall, a lot of the experimental techniques are the same. A lot of the department structures are going to be similar. So I just knew that I was coming into this with too much of my own experience. And I also know that I have a hard time letting go of that experience when I go into whatever media. So for example, my husband loves the show Never Have I Ever, which is about this really hysterical but messy teen girl, Vivi, and I have a hard time sometimes with it because even though I really want to love and support a show that is about an Indian American teenager, sometimes I come in too much with my own Indian American teenager experience where I'm like, no, but that's not realistic or whatever, and so that's just my own personality defect. And we're gonna examine that defect in full today. The other thing is I just don't really love student-teacher romances. It's just always kind of icky to me. And, that's especially true for undergrad, student romances. That's weird. Ew. I don't like it. Grad student professor relationships, I guess technically I have to make some allowances for because otherwise I would be a hypocrite because I did technically marry a professor while I was a grad student. So but in my defense, that's because econ is weird and they go straight from grad school to professorship a lot of the time. But that's a whole separate video about why economics is weird. But the thing is, I do feel like it's different if you're a student dating a professor in your department. I don't know. I thought of my advisor as my lab parent. And I thought of the other professors in my department as lab aunts and uncles. There's just something weird about it to me, but I recognize again that this is my own personal feelings and they're not even completely consistent, but a lot of people have loved this book, and somehow finding out that it was Rilo fanfic made me really curious about it, even though I did not read Rilo fanfic. They were not a pairing that I shipped. And I do think it's exhausting to hear scientists be like, well, that's not accurate. Anyways, the point is that I wanted to set my feelings aside and see if I could enjoy The Love Hypothesis. And unfortunately, my baggage was just too much to bear. I just brought too much. And it was within a few pages, there were just details that just did not jive with my own personal grad school experience. Adam and Olive have this meet cute in a bathroom where Adam is dumping lab chemicals down the sink. And I was like, what? Why are you dumping your experiment down a bathroom sink? Why is your experiment leaving the lab? Why is it, do you not have a lab sink? What is going on? Just from my own experience, the way our labs were set up, the bathrooms were outside of the lab. You would never bring experimental material out of your lab to the bathroom for any reason. That doesn't make sense. The only reason you would bring experimental material out of the lab is if you're taking it to another lab. There's just so much there where I was just I know this is such a small thing, but that's part of what's weird about it. You don't need him to be dumping lab materials in a bathroom sink to make this moment happen. So why is he dumping lab materials in a bathroom sink? And then another thing is that part of the reason that Adam ostensibly agrees to be in this fake relationship is because Stanford is withholding his funding because they have deemed him a flight risk. And they have, I guess, in the logic of the book, decided that because he's a flight risk, they don't want to fund research that he's ultimately going to take somewhere else. So, look, No one has ever accused academia of being logical or pragmatic or strategic in any positive way. But as a strategy, like, that doesn't make sense. And again, doesn't like really connect with the experiences that I have seen played out in academia. Like, if you know that a professor is potentially going to leave and you want them to stay, you don't withhold their funding. You don't make it harder for them to do their work. You don't make them want to go somewhere else to be able to do their work. You don't like make the current situation more hostile to them. You try to give them a raise, you try to give them other things. And I don't want to sit here and be like, my baggage is the one true baggage. This is the only like basis from which any story about academia can actually really be rooted in. Like, it has to be all very in line with what this set of experiences are. Like, obviously there are a lot of different experiences in grad school. And the thing is, the writer of this book is a scientist, and I'm pretty sure she's a professor as well. So my assumption is that the things that are happening in this book are either not outlandish to her experiences, or there are things that she changed for dramatic effect, which is all fine, right? Like, none of these details, well, I mean, some of them I think are actually kind of a big deal, but like, they're not actually that big of a deal if the story itself is good. But my problem, as I'll talk about in a bit, is like, I just didn't really find the story that compelling either. And like I said, like, there were some things that to me did feel kind of big in terms of like, yes, clearly this is being written this way for dramatic effect, but the thing that it's rooted in is so like, I don't know, real and visceral that like, I just couldn't handle it. And the thing I am talking about is the seminar scene, which is a scene that I was warned about going in, and even still reading it, I was not prepared for the level of cringe that I was going to feel. So in the scene, for reasons that are very clearly contrived just to make this moment happen, Olive is sitting in Adam's lap in the middle of a seminar where everyone is gathered to hear another scientist talk. And I just, like, the only word I have for it is I just like cringed. I just couldn't read it and enjoy it for what it was supposed to be, which is like this supposedly cute moment where like she's sitting in his lap, but like he maybe kind of likes her, and it's kind of, you know, he's like a little bit maybe aroused, you know, like all that stuff. I just couldn't read it without cringing because I'm just like, what the fuck are you guys doing? You were at a seminar, like what the fuck? And I think at like one point, one of the characters tells her like, it'll be fine because I'm pretty sure like someone else has given a hand job to somebody else at a seminar. And I'm like, no, I don't know. I mean, okay, fine. I don't know. Again, maybe in the grand totality of all of the grad school experiences that have happened in the world in all of time, someone has given someone else a hand job at a seminar. But like, that's just not a thing. I know I'm supposed to have a sense of humor about it. I know that I'm supposed to just be like, yeah, it's a joke, whatever. But I just can't read it without being like humorless because it's so cringy to me. It's just, I can't think about it without thinking about every seminar I've been to and being like, what if someone was giving a hand job in the course? Like, I don't know. It's so weird. I'm sorry. I just can't. I don't have an eloquent way to put it. I just can't. I do appreciate how fully invested she was in writing that scene and how many small details had to add up to make this truly contrived moment happen. So like, hats off to the author for writing a scene that clearly she was ready for, but like, I was not ready for it, even though I was warned. And I still, like, I think it's going to take me a while before I can, like, I don't know, enjoy it for what it was supposed to be. I don't know if I can. So like I've said a bajillion times probably by now, this is all so rooted in what I am bringing to the book in my own experience. And you know, I've read romances that are set in other industries or fields or whatever. And I'm sure that like if someone from those industry or field or whatever was reading that book, they would also have moments where they would be like full body cringe. This is weird. Like, what the fuck is going on, you guys? And me, in my blissful ignorance, would just be like, whatever, I don't fucking care. Let these two characters have their moment. And, you know, that's fine, right? Like, we're all just like reading books with our own experiences in mind. So, you know, if you read the seminar scene and you thought it was cute, like, I'm not judging you. I am just judging these two characters in that moment because I think that's a terrible, terrible choice to make. Maybe even worse than their decision to pretend to date each other. But setting aside my personality flaws, my real issue is just that aside from these things, I just didn't really care for the rest of the execution of the book. There were these scenes, particularly in the beginning, where so many things were just contrived and clearly set up to make specific outcomes happen, but not in a way that was for me like fun or compelling. And especially because these were two characters who I never felt particularly invested in. Olive kind of has this like helpless genius thing going on, and Adam has this asshole genius thing going on. And I wasn't invested in either of those individual personalities, and I definitely wasn't invested in them coming together and finding any mutual, I don't know, happiness or mutual whatever story going on. I actually went into the book thinking I was going to be a little bit more sympathetic to Adam, just because like I had an advisor in grad school who was a person that people would describe as tough, but also at the same time, like he was an advisor who I ultimately really, really trusted and who I felt like I could argue with. And those were all things that were really important to me. And like in the long run, like the toughness was done in a way that like I really benefited from. So I kind of went in thinking like maybe that's Adam's deal. And I think the book tries to convince you that that is his deal, but I don't really find it very successful. I felt like it kept trying to tell me that, and I felt like Adam kept trying to tell me that, but the actual demonstration of it was just really, really shallow. Especially like at one point, like this is for some reason the detail that always sticks with me, but like there's a rumor that he's like thrown petri dishes when he's mad, and that to me is like next level. Like I feel like it's one thing to be like critical of students. I think throwing petri dishes is like a whole other spectrum of behavior. And I mean, it is supposedly just a rumor, but I don't know. Once I heard the rumor, I was like, it's true. I don't know. I buy it about this guy. And in addition to the other details that I was distracted with from my own experience, there were other things that just like didn't really make sense in terms of like Olive, like, I don't know, like not knowing about a seminar being given by a scientist that she's really obsessed with and that everybody else seems to know is giving this talk and she somehow doesn't know. I don't know. There's just lots of little moments like that that just didn't really, I don't know, they just didn't fully add up, and they were kind of frustrating in terms of what they meant for the characterization, except that they didn't seem like they really were done with the characters in mind. There were just so many moments like that that felt like they were done more to make the plot happen rather than to actually make the characters feel like very vivid, thought out characters the way that I've enjoyed with the other romances that I've talked about today. And then like one of the big things that I found really frustrating was just like the way their relationship was portrayed in the context of a workplace. And this is related actually to a lot of thoughts that I had when I was reading Something to Talk About by Meryl Wilsner. I did a full review of that book, so I'll link to that down below if you want to hear me kind of expand on what I'm about to talk about. But basically, you know, these are two books that have a fake dating relationship between someone who is like in a position of authority and someone who is like sort of more under their authority. And Something to Talk About, really it is like an employee-boss relationship. This is technically not quite at that level. And then, so it is a workplace fake dating situation. And both of these books have a whole plot line around like toxic, sexual harassing dudes in the workplace that gets resolved in really neat, unrealistic ways. And I think how you respond to just how neatly those plot lines wrap up is going to depend a little bit on to what extent you're willing to accept the wish fulfillment of that. Because obviously, like, you know, romance novels are largely wish fulfillment. Like, I don't love how neat those wrap-ups are just because the reality is so different, but I also like don't mind the fact that these books are kind of willing to indulge in that fantasy that like, yeah, you can kind of just call out a person and do a few other things and then, you know, be gone, asshole, like ensues, you know? So here's the thing. I've read a lot of romance novels and I have read a lot of workplace romances. So I'm really, I think, pretty used to the idea that like sometimes you kind of have to set aside some things just for the fun of the story, the fantasy of the story. I mean, it's kind of ironic I'm saying this now when I've just talked, you know, for several minutes about how hard it was for me to set aside some things for the sake of this book. But I am used to the idea that that is a thing, especially for workplace romances where you are dealing with like a whole culture around these people that they are maybe potentially going to mess up with their relationship. I'm used to the idea that sometimes you just have to pretend that nothing gets fucked up, right? Like you have to kind of just let that be. So maybe because I'm used to that idea, I actually have a harder time with workplace romances that actually do want to deal with the idea of toxic workplaces, but then in my opinion don't sufficiently handle how challenging the central romance of the book is to the workplace that surrounds the characters. I don't really love it when, you know, these books want to take on the idea of a toxic workplace while still creating one with this central relationship. So with how neatly the toxic, sexually harassing dude plotline is like handled, there is that wish fulfillment side, but there is also, to me, what feels like sometimes a superficial dealing with what it means to work in a toxic workplace. Because like, yeah, it's easy to be like, there's this one bad apple, but it's harder to be like, hey, maybe this thing we're rooting for is also a problem. And the thing is, I hated Olive and Adam's relationship for everyone around them. The book at one point basically talks about how Olive is realizing that she should like stick with this fake dating thing because she's realized that it gets her a better spot in line for the centrifuge. I think she also talks about it like getting people to stop stealing her pipettes. And I was like, what the fuck, dude? Like, leave a passive aggressive note or hide your pipettes like the rest of us. You don't need to date a professor to make this happen. I don't know that it says anything good that my idea of a more functional workplace is like passive aggressive notes and hiding your things, but I do think at the very least what it shows for me is that like Olive is just like not capable of like talking to people and just being like, hey, I need the centrifuge, or hey, don't use my pipettes. Like, I don't know, maybe there's a point where she does that in the book and I missed it, but for me, the fact that she is resorting to fake dating and that I am supposed to kind of find it cute that she's using that as a way to stand up for herself, it's just weird. Like, for me, that's like part of the reason why professors and students are not supposed to date. It's not just about the power differential between the professor and the student. It's also about how weird it makes it for everyone else. Like, we actually see it happen in the book, that everyone else is weirded out by it and they don't know how to interact with Olive anymore. And again, that seminar scene, weird, inappropriate. And I think part of this, again, like hits from my own experience of like knowing people who have worked in labs where there was someone dating a professor or dating the PI, and like it created weird situations in the lab because people didn't necessarily know like if they complained about something, if it was going to get back to the professor, like all that stuff. And there is a moment where, you know, someone else in the program does call Olive out, but ultimately that felt like it was really done more to give Olive a way to call Adam out rather than to actually engage with like how awkward of a place everyone else is now in because of their relationship. And I mean, to what extent that should matter, I don't know. But for me, reading the book, like not dealing with this as a real life scenario, it was just kind of like, either fully engage with this or not, but this like weird pseudo space where we're kind of gonna like lean in, like acknowledge it, but not actually grapple with it, just left me in that place where I was like, I'm not rooting for either of these people. Like, I don't care about them. And when there is this other worse, toxic, gross dude happening to them, like it just feels like a distraction. And like, speaking of that redemption, like Adam's redemption to me is barely a redemption. It is not really satisfying. It doesn't really do anything for me. And I was thinking about this in the context of this being Rilo fanfic, or Rilo, whatever, fanfic, and the fact that like, this is, again, my own personality defect, but I was thinking, this is also like the Community meme. I can forgive blowing up a planet, but I draw the line at throwing petri dishes. Like, there's just something for me that is just never redeemed about Adam in this book. Everything that's done in the book to make it feel like a redemption feels just kind of like flatly stated and just not really earned, in my opinion. And again, I know that it's ridiculous to be like, I think I hate Adam more than Kylo Ren, but in my defense, Kylo Ren is like rooted in a type of character that is sci-fi, right? Like, he's like, there's like at least not yet, we're not worrying about people who are going to blow up planets or whatever it was he did. Like, that's not a real concern for me at this point. But shitty professors who like are really, really shitty to their students and not actually helpful, like that is a problem. Like, that is a thing I have seen. I have seen really shitty professors, and I've seen the damage they do to people's careers. And so when the book tries to convince me at the end that actually he's not that shitty, it never felt like earned. It, like, that's just the word I go back to. It just didn't feel really convincing, and I just also didn't care. Like, that was the other thing, is I just didn't really care if he was actually secretly a good dude because I just wasn't invested. So yeah, Those are my unfortunately negative feelings about the love hypothesis. I really could have just done a whole video about it, but instead I decided to wrap it up into a bigger video. So thank you guys for watching. If you read any of these books, if you want to argue with me about whether or not it makes sense to be dumping lab experiments in a bathroom sink, you are welcome to do so, but I'm just gonna say that that's not something that we were allowed to do, and probably for good reason. So yeah, bye.